Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The JAYREELZ podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. Here on another holiday Monday to commemorate President's Past. I'm here to unwrap the current sports landscape to deliver my thoughts on all that's happening, as this is the JAYREELZ podcast with Joe's JAYREELZ. For my first timers, welcome aboard. And for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle or even as early as last Thursday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And now that we're a week past the Super Bowl and the NFL season, and I'm sure there were a lot of tears shed throughout the nation knowing that there was not any participation or any competition on the gridiron. And for me, I did not shed a tear or did not feel sorry for, I need to have the NFL back. Even with a bad sports weekend, even with it being the sports dead zone that it is, I could certainly rejoice knowing that there's a little bit of a respite before we ramp it up, as I've talked about several times, when we get to the latter part of March into April, and then from there we'll take off. But speaking of taking off, I'm going to start with the NBA. And as far as the All-Star weekend goes, did I watch any of it? Was I in tune to what's going on? The first answer is no, I didn't watch. And the second is yes, I was in tune to what had taken place there. And not to dissect so many different things, to me, there's only two items that I really need to unpack here. And the first one being the game itself. Now, they had this different format with the whole Team Chuck, Team Kenny, Team Shaq, and Team Candace, how they drafted these players and they broke up the teams. It wasn't East versus West, although there seems to be another idea that a lot of the players may be in favor for, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But for the format, certainly did not pique any interest in my eyes or even in my heart and soul when it comes to the All-Star game. We know it's a thing of the past when it comes to these players congregating in whatever city that it may be and having just all of the talents full display with some defense and some competitiveness. As we all know, that hasn't been the case over the last decade plus. So with this new format, I certainly didn't buy in. And even though it seemed like it was a situation where when you break it down by quarters and the first of 41, I believe that was the final game. But again, it's just a little bit too confusing, and it's really a gimmick when you think about it. So therefore, I didn't watch. But based on what some of the players had said, they did not like the stoppages. They did not like the amount of breaks that were played throughout the course of the evening, as stated by Trae Young, as well as Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. So just knowing that two of the All-Stars, and I don't know how many other players, whether they were tight-lipped about it or felt as if, I'm not going to care because it was just a weekend away from competitive basketball and just kind of soaking in everything of what the All-Star weekend has to offer, in this case by the Bay Area. But when you have two of the players that were in the game talk about how it didn't have any rhythm or flow and that the breaks throughout the course of the evening was just too many, obviously that's a problem. But the one thing that may come out of this, and based on some of the things that I read between the players in the game and even the ones who didn't suit up, a la Giannis in particular, is that there may be a world versus the USA format, which I understand the NHL had done once upon a time, so it's almost a been there, done that for them. But for the NBA, I think that'd be great because you do have a big influx of European as well as even Canadian. When you look at SGA, obviously Giannis, Nikola Jokic, when healthy, Luka. We could go through the list of players that could certainly stack up against the USA players, how that will shape up and play out as far as the powers that be wanting to iron it out and maybe starting next year to have that particular format. Now, you know what? I'd be interested in that. But for right now, whatever it is that they want to conjure up and just manufacture as far as generating eyeballs to the sets, and I don't care what the numbers are, how many people followed and watched. To me, that is the 30 and under, which I get it. That's probably the demographic that they're looking at here. They're not caring about the 55-year-old man like myself, despite the fact that I was watching NBA All-Star games dating back to the early 80s. And of course, they're not paying attention to someone like myself, although they should. But again, it's more about the individual player. It's more about the Steph Currys. It's more about the Jason Tatums. I know LeBron didn't suit up, which obviously was a situation where you have one of your game's biggest stars and obviously this generation not playing the game because of foot and ankle soreness. All right, is he entitled to do so? Of course, he is LeBron James, but for those who are interested in seeing LeBron suit up and perform, I'm sure those people were either crestfallen or certainly disappointed to know that the 40-year-old ageless one was not going to play in the game. But maybe a World versus USA format will work, because what we saw there last night, and obviously I didn't see it, so I can't really dissect it or certainly critique it, but I'm just going based on what some of the players said, and they just said it for me. So that's where I didn't have to watch. And then the other thing about the game, or really about the weekend, we could talk about the three-point shooting contest. That's what it is. But the slam dunk competition, and I understand this is going to sound like I'm raining on Mac McClung's parade, and I talked about this on my YouTube channel yesterday, of course, at JAYREELZ, shameless plug. But for Mac McClung, and I get it, he's won back-to-back dunk contests. He's a guy that you couldn't pick out of a lineup. Now, I know who McClung is because he went to Georgetown, the college basketball team that I root for, before transferring to Texas Tech. So, of course, I'm familiar with his game and with him as a player. But when he was with the Sixers 2 years ago and then in the G League with Orlando, which I believe is still the case now, I'm not following Mac McClung's career when it comes to what he's doing on the court. But here he is. He gets a chance to become the first ever three-peat champion of the slam dunk competition, and he did so with that spectacular dunk over the car, which to me was better than Blake Griffin's dunk of yesteryear, because Griffin went over the hood, and I get it that Griffin probably got 6-7 inches on McClung, but for him to do it over the full body of the car while doing a reverse dunk, I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. But with that being said, McClung is a guy that is barely hanging on to an NBA career. And of course they're going to bring him back, considering that he's going to defend his dunk championship. And now that he won this year, of course he's going to come back next year to try to just add on to it. And that's probably going to be his claim to fame when it's all said and done. And you know what? If that's the case, fine. But you also have to admit that the NBA, this is where they dropped the ball here, because they need to have people, or I should say players, in this contest that have some sort of name recognition. All right, you want to have a rookie there, Stephon Castle, someone like that, that's fine. But a lot of these guys, A, you can't pick out of a lineup, as I mentioned, and B, if they had a guy that has been in the league for a couple of years that you know, it doesn't have to be a superstar player, but someone that has some sort of ilk, or maybe somebody that's actually participating in the All-Star game. How about that? I think the NBA should say, hey, whomever's going to be participating in the All-Star game, whether it's by vote or even coming in as a substitute, they should automatically participate in the slam dunk competition. And to me, that's like having the MLB All-Star game where a guy's in the minor leagues and he's already hit 35 home runs, but he's a 4A player, meaning that he's better than a AAA player, but he's just short of being a major league player. And you're going to have him in the home run derby, and he's going to win championship after championship after championship. And then forget about the guys who are in the All-Star game or been in the home run derby year in and year out, where you pretty much kind of leave them behind in the dust because of this 4A player. Similar to McClung and everybody else as far as the rest of the field goals, where it's minuscule because you only have 3 other players participating. And obviously you got missed dunk after missed dunk. I mean, it's just a disaster. And I don't know how you fix it. Would it be nice for them to have a couple of guys that are going to participate in the game, maybe spread it out to 6 players, where you have 2 players that are in the All-Star game that are going to compete, as well as maybe a rookie or second-year player, or I guess a guy like Mac McClung. All right, then maybe that will probably at least enhance it a little bit, so maybe people would watch, or at least have someone like myself watch. Because again, no offense to McClung, but he's a guy that nobody even knows. If you're a dyed-in-the-wool NBA fan or a real good NBA fan, yes, of course you do know, based on his track record in this particular setting. But as far as him being an NBA player, you don't know if he's averaged 2 points a game, no points a game, if he's in the G League, or if he just dusted him off from wherever he's playing. And that's the problem. So until they fix that, Saturday night, the competition, the slam dunk, it's not going to have anything close to what it was yesteryear. And then I even made a mention yesterday about LeBron James. Now, granted, he has not participated in the slam dunk competition. Back in 2010, he said he was going to perform in Jerry's World when the All-Star game was at Dallas, but he never did. But you know what? If I was LeBron, I would say, I'm 40 years old. I get it. I got to save my knees, and I got to make sure that I spare myself for the remainder of the year and in the postseason. The big picture, I get it. But why not give us a few dunks? Because believe it or not, I think he could probably win the slam dunk competition even at 40. And how would that look as far as his resume goes? Now, does he need to prove to anybody? Of course he doesn't. But I would think in the back of his mind that, hey, 40 years old, I get it, I can't sky the way I used to, but he is 6'8", and it's not as if he's going to have to reach by every fiber of his being to try to slam dunk the ball. He could do it in his sleep. So imagine him going out in the slam dunk competition and actually winning the thing at the age of 40. To me, that'd be the ultimate flex. Even Michael Jordan couldn't do that. So, but again, that's just a thought on my side where if LeBron happened to participate, it'd be great. And not only that, how many people do you think would tune in to watch the slam dunk competition if he happened to participate in the dunk contest? I know he doesn't care, and I know he said that there's no way that no matter, even if he took him back 20 years and his 40-year-old body, he still wouldn't do it. All right, fine, but guess what? It would certainly be ratings. It would certainly be one to watch and a spectacle, and I'm sure he would actually do very well because, A, he is LeBron James. He's indestructible, and like I mentioned earlier, he's ageless. And then you also had the skills competition where the Spurs screwed up, and I don't know how that happened. I didn't read into that, but for whatever the reason, they got disqualified. All right, well, so be it. That's certainly not a good look on the Spurs. I guess that's Chris Paul and Victor Wembanyama. I don't even know who the participants were there, but to me, All-Star Saturday and the All-Star Weekend overall, it's a dud. You can't really look at that event or those two nights as one that you're going to want to gravitate or even turn on, even if it is a dead sports month. And unfortunately, that's a sad case. So that's what you have there with the All-Star Weekend, and Steph Curry was the MVP. Obviously, I didn't watch the game, so I don't know. I'm sure he was the hometown guy, considering that the game was played in the Chase Center out in San Francisco. So congratulations to him. And as we take a look at the first half of the NBA season, how I look at what has taken place here when it comes to surprises, disappointments, I think you have to say one of the biggest surprises are the Cavaliers, considering where they're at atop the Eastern Conference with their record and how they stand at this current moment. I don't think anybody expected the Cavs with new coach Kenny Atkinson to have a 44-10 record after 54 games, and then on top of that have a 6-game lead in the loss column over the Celtics. I could see it being 44-10, and maybe the Celtics are a game or two behind. We could certainly look at it from that standpoint, but considering that they have a sizable lead, and I would think that they're going to have that one seed when it's all said and done, you'd have to right away include them as the biggest surprise so far this NBA year. Oklahoma City, not so much, because remember last year they were a one seed, as we know, and even though they fizzled out in the postseason in the second round against Dallas, but I would think a learning process for them with what happened there last year, and not to say that they're going to be an automatic in a conference final or even in an NBA final, but I would think with that learning process, and hopefully that sticks with them going into this postseason, to have that long run, to see their youth, to see their athleticism, to even see their defense, because they have a ton of very good defensive players. I think Oklahoma City is going to have a lot of legs here this postseason based on what happened last year, but of course, we have to wait and see how that's going to play out. Another big surprise, I have to say, are the Memphis Grizzlies. Who would have thought with John Morant and everything that happened to him off the court, and then with the injury last year where he missed a ton of the season, and then even had to miss some games early on, you kind of thought, I don't know how Memphis is going to play out here in this 2024-25 NBA season. Well, they're currently number 2 in the Western Conference. And remember, they were a 2 seed a couple of years ago before losing to the Lakers. That was when the Lakers went on to a conference final. But I think Memphis has been a big surprise. And even with John Morant still not being his bona fide all-star self, he hasn't been a guy that's been 25, 26, 27 points and has been electrifying night in and night out. But they lead the NBA in scoring. They have a high percentage usage rate when it comes to the offensive side of the ball. And it's really been a collective effort for this team to put themselves where they are right now. Now, they're not going to catch Oklahoma City, but to me, they've been a big surprise this year, and I have to give it up. Same for the Rockets, but we saw a bit of a progression with them last year, considering they had that long winning streak when they tried to get back into that play-in scenario at the bottom of the Western Conference. But I'm not going to look at them as a surprise, but you can look at them that way considering what Ime Udoka has done and how they progressed here in this second year under their coach. As far as disappointments, right off the bat, you got to look at the Phoenix Suns. I'm not even going to look at the Golden State Warriors right now because the Warriors, remember, they hovered around this area last year and then didn't even make it out of the 9-10 game against the Lakers. But as far as the Suns go, with everything that the owner had pushed all the chips to the middle of the table in reference to bringing in Kevin Durant, the trade for Bradley Beal, we know Devin Booker's been a mainstay, and I get it that they don't have a lot of depth. But right now, they are currently 2 games under 500 on the outside looking in, and automatically they are a major disappointment. And right behind them has to be the Sixers. And we understood Joel Embiid with his injury history, and even Paul George for that matter, as they try to get themselves a big three with Tyrese Maxey to go with the aforementioned other 2 in Philly. But it certainly hasn't worked out. They are 20-34. I picked them as an under this year, and I've already clinched, and we just got to President's Day. So that just goes to show you, granted that the injuries played a big part in that, but that is one over-under I certainly don't have to worry about when it comes to the Sixers. But as far as disappointments, that's what you have there as the biggest ones to go along with the big surprises. You want to throw in the Heat, considering the debacle there with Jimmy Butler, as they're currently 2 games under 500. Let me see if I see that correctly. 3 games under 500 and currently 9th place in the Eastern Conference. They'll probably get into the postseason, but overall, certainly not going to bode well for a Heat team with a Heat culture as far as the success that they had in years past, getting to a conference final, getting to an NBA final in back-to-back years, and then last year exiting in the first round, and it looks like they're going to barely make it into the postseason this year. So those are what I have there as far as the first half recaps. Could I talk about some of the other teams? Whether it be Denver, who's played well, winners of 8 in a row, and maybe that they've gotten themselves on track to have a big second half, or quote-unquote second half. The Lakers and how they performed, 12 games over 500. Yes, they may not have a lot of size. Remember that trade got nixed with Mark Williams, where Dalton Knecht goes back to LA. So they're going to have to figure it out with Alex Len patrolling the inner part of the paint there. And then you have the T-Wolves, who certainly haven't found their way in right footing, considering last year they had a big year before losing into the conference finals against the Mavericks. Right now they're a 7 seed out west. And then the Mavericks, they've had injury after injury here as of late. Daniel Gafford's out 6 weeks. We know about Anthony Davis, who's going to be out for probably another 3 weeks. Derek Lively, still weeks from coming back. So their front court is decimated. And obviously there's no Luka Doncic, so this is certainly Kyrie's show for him to handle until everybody starts to come back. So I don't know how they're going to play out. I think they're going to survive and make it into the postseason, but they may be going in with scotch tape, bubble gum, and who knows, duct tape on top of that to try to piecemeal that team together to make a long run, because as we all know, as controversial as that trade has been, I know the Maverick fan is still outraged 2.5 weeks after that trade has been consummated. And then in the East, the Bucks are starting to find their footing. The Pistons have been a big surprise. Got to throw them in the mix as far as what they've done. They're currently 6th with a 29-26 record in the Eastern Conference. So give it up to what they've done there as far as on a whole, trying to get themselves back into the periphery, not only just of the playoffs, but just as far as relevancy goes. Because as we all know, the Pistons are a far cry from the, forget about the bad boy Pistons, but even the Rip Hamilton, Rasheed Wallace, Ben Wallace, when they won a title 21 years ago. So now as they try to get themselves back into the thought process of the NBA fan, at least we could look at the Pistons, maybe not as a big threat, but maybe a team that if they hover around the 4, 5, 6 area and they're only 2 games behind the Pacers for the 4 seed, which dare I even say, could they even have home court advantage in the first round? We'll have to wait and see about that. But with Cade Cunningham, Jaden Ivey, I know who's had a big-time injury, and Isaiah Stewart, who is probably the bad boy of the NBA right now, even over Dylan Brooks. But you have a scenario where the Pistons doing very well under JB Bickerstaff, so you have to give them credit for what they've done, especially after the disaster last year with Monty Williams, unfortunately, with the one and done that he had. But with Bickerstaff leaving Cleveland to go to Detroit, showing his coaching chops as a guy who certainly can coach in this league, but now as he gets deeper into the season and into the postseason, how they're going to prevail there, of course, that remains to be seen, but give it up to what they've done. And overall, that's what you have there with the NBA. I mean, Celtics, Knicks, doing their thing, Bucks, trying to get themselves back toward the top of the conference. Lakers, as we mentioned, the Clippers, again, a team that with the old guard of Harden and Kawhi Leonard, and now they bring in Ben Simmons. Who knows what they're going to do come playoff time, especially depends on the health of Kawhi. And that's what you have. Sacramento, I've talked about the Spurs who are on the outside looking in. I think it's important for the Spurs to get into the playoffs this year. Of course, with Wembanyama, we want to see him on that stage early on, even if it's just going to be in a one and done or possibly two and done scenario. So you have that to chew on. But that is pretty much your NBA first half. And when we get to the second half, which starts in earnest on Thursday, but there is a makeup game. Charlotte is going to play the Lakers. That's a makeup from the January 9th game due to the fires there in Southern California. But with the schedule and with the season picking up there on Thursday, I'll talk more about the schedule heading into the weekend, as well as what to look out for here in the second half as we start to shape up the rest of this month into March and April for an NBA season that we're waiting with bated breath to get to a postseason to start the 2-month run for a new NBA final and a champion to boot. Now, before I move on to college basketball, I want to get into my over-under win total since I made a mention of it earlier with the Sixers. For starters, my over totals right now looking pretty good. Memphis, 43.5, is that the right number? 45.5, excuse me. Houston, 42.5, so those look like to be locks. Sacramento, they have some work to do. Now, remember, they dug themselves out of that hole earlier when they fired Mike Brown and brought in Doug Christie. They've leveled off a little bit. So right there, I'm going to be at a reach. I believe what are they at right now? 26. Let me pull up their number in a second. They are at 46.5. So that will have to hold for a moment. But I really believe that it's going to come down to the final couple of games in order for me to get by with the Kings winning. And Sacramento, currently their record is 28-27. All right. Outside shot, not impossible. So we'll keep an eye on that. Sixers already a lock, 34 losses. Their number was 52.5, so I'm good there. The Heat, talked about them, 44.5 is their number. I think they may fall under considering they're a couple of games under 500 as we speak. And then the Raptors, that could come down to the final weekend too. They're at 17, their number's 30.5. So who knows, if I get a break here, a break there, could I go 6-0 when it's all said and done? Listen, I'll take 5-1 after a 1-5 NFL season. And even though my baseball season last year was at 500, my NBA last year actually was 5-1. So I'm much better when it comes to the NBA. So let's see if that will pan out here over the remaining 2 months of the season. All right, now I'll keep my sneakers laced to go through the college basketball landscape. And you had a big game there on Saturday. And I know I didn't discuss it on Thursday's podcast. I didn't take a look at the schedule. And maybe I should start looking at that, even though the schedule with the college basketball, unlike the football, of course, with it being weekly, but you did have Auburn going to Alabama, a number 1 versus number 2, something that we haven't seen in quite some time. But for Auburn, as we all know, physical team led by Johnny Broome. And they actually led from in front and played pretty well, although Alabama did have a comeback there late, but they fell short. And the Auburn Tigers, they're a team that I think could really be one that when it's all said and done, it's not going out on a limb by any stretch. They're going to be a number 1, maybe overall in the tournament, but certainly they have the physicality, and certainly when you have a guy like Broome who looks like he's going to be an All-America first team when it's all said and done. And when you have a scenario where the Auburn team looks like they're going to be the one that could be one of the Final Four, if not the last team that's going to cut down the nets when it's all said and done. Now, of course, a lot could happen as we know. We've seen teams that have had number 1 rankings overall. Look at Virginia back in 2017 before, or I think it was 18 before they won in 19. And I'm not trying to compare Auburn to Virginia, but we would think Auburn's going to have a lot of legs here in this tournament, and we still have a month away. In fact, it would be 31 days from the start of the tournament because March 18th is the actual start when you're talking about the first 4, and then on the 20th, in earnest, as I mentioned before, and I'm probably going to say it a million times between now and what will it be? 4 weeks from this coming Thursday, actually, what's today, 17th? So yeah, when you think about it, February 20th will be this Thursday, so you'll actually have exactly 1 month. Mind you, it's a short month here in February, but it'll be a month from this coming Thursday to when the tournament will really start to bloom in earnest. So we have that to look forward to. And when we take a look at it, it's going to be Auburn, possibly even Alabama, when you think about it, if they hover around the anywhere between 2 and 4. followed by Duke and Florida. They're the top 4 teams in the nation at the moment, and you would think that they're going to have 1 seeds throughout. Maybe they'll have Auburn in a scenario where they'll be number 1 overall, and then you could pretty much factor in where the other teams. Now, it's going to be tricky because that means you're going to have a team that either plays in the South or in the Mid-Atlantic or the Atlantic Coast Conference like Duke. They may be in the Midwest or even in the Western region. So who knows what the committee is going to take a 30,000-foot view of this, but there's still plenty of time to be played with a lot of games ahead, as well as conference tournaments, which will be in the second week of March. So this is what we have right now. Auburn looks like they're going to be a formidable team that may go all the way or at least to a Final Four. And then you have the other teams that are going to follow suit. We've talked about how the SEC has, I'm not going to say a stranglehold, but certainly has their fingerprints throughout the top 25. We talked about them being a very stout conference, similar to the football teams as we've seen year in and year out. But you could have, think about this, people, you could have as many, when it's all said and done, up to 13 teams make it into the tournament. And as we all know, 68 make it in. So that is, when you do the math, 20% of the field will be from the Southeastern Conference. But a lot could happen. Things could certainly shake down a different way for a lot of those teams that could be on the bubble. But we know the aforementioned Auburn, Alabama, you're talking about Kentucky, Mississippi State. I mean, so many other teams that could be a part of the tournament and certainly could really have a lot of length and a lot of legs when it comes to these teams, maybe even making it in all 4 regions to where you could have a Final Four of all SEC teams. And that would be, I would think off the top of my head, in this part of the March Madness tournament era, something that we haven't seen. Now, I talked about the 84-85 season where you had Georgetown, St. John's, and Villanova, 3 of the 4 teams represent, as well as Memphis State, in the Final Four in that year. So, again, we still have plenty of time to talk about it between now and then, but you have to give Auburn their due as a team that looks like they're going to be probably the favorite going in, obviously as a number 1 seed overall, but who knows? It's still wide open. It's still a tournament that I'm sure it's going to be anybody's up for grabs as we get deeper into the month and then obviously into March. We're certainly going to have everything from soup to nuts as we get into more of the college basketball year. And let me take a look at what the schedule does look like here. Now, you're not going to have a rematch between Alabama and Auburn until you get to that first full weekend in March. Now, I understand March 1st falls on when? Next Saturday? As a matter of fact, I should know that because that's when I'm going to have my 7th anniversary podcast. So more details to come. I'm sure if you've been listening, you know what lies ahead when it comes to that podcast. But for March 1st, 2nd, I believe they're going to have a rematch there on the 8th, if I'm not mistaken, which will lead into the conference championship week. So you'll see a rematch, and that will be in Auburn, where Auburn already had gone to Alabama and beaten them there. So as far as the schedule goes for the early part of the week, and I know there's a ton of games. Let's see. Duke and Virginia, that's tonight. Usually have the crazy Monday games, but not here in particular. Purdue at Michigan State. Game to look out for. Texas A&M at Mississippi State. Texas A&M, another team there in the SEC we have to look out for. Then you have Houston, Texas Tech at TCU. Houston and Arizona State. Now, Houston's not part of the SEC, as you know. Kansas, BYU. And then Wednesday, what do we have there shaping up as far as college basketball goes? Vanderbilt will go to Kentucky. And that's pretty much your bulk of what lies ahead here. St. John's, who beat Creighton. Now they're in the top 10. Alabama at Missouri. Who knows? That could be an upset special there, even with Alabama losing at home to Auburn. But now that they have to go to play Mizzou, is there a possibility of an upset special? Maybe a little bit of a hangover with what happened there on Saturday against the Tigers. So you'll just have to keep that in mind. And then Auburn is actually going to play Arkansas there at home on Wednesday, which will round out your college schedule until we get to the podcast there on Thursday. So now let me turn my attention, take off the high tops and lace up the skates to go through what has happened there with the Four Nations face-off. And you had 2 games today. By the time you listen to this, you'll probably have one of the games that are already be played between Finland and Canada, where the nightcap is Sweden and the U.S., where those games are going to be played at the TD Garden in Boston. The first game, Finland and Canada, is at 1, followed by the nightcap with Sweden and the U.S. Now, what happened there Saturday night was a sight for someone like myself who loves the physical hockey, who loves fighting in the sport. If you haven't followed me throughout the years on this podcast, I am a proponent for fighting in the sport. Now, we know it's a dying breed. We know that there are a handful of big-time tough guys. I'm talking about big-time. I'm not talking about lightweights or guys that fight on occasion, because that breed is a thing of the past. Although you still have the Ryan Reeves and the Matthew Oliviers and the Desjardins from Philly, as well as Matt Rempe, you still have guys that certainly could throw with the best of them, but are certainly a far cry from what we're used to back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s for that matter. And what you saw there Saturday night in Montreal prior to the start of the game, where the Canadian faithful up in Montreal were booing the American national anthem, and I talked about there, what was it, about a week or so ago. To me, I'm not going to sweat that. And I understand there's people on the U.S. side are going to talk about the 51st state, and they're going to get all political with that. To me, that's nonsense. I'm not going to get wrapped up in that. But for the Canadian fans who want to boo the national anthem, I could care less. Doesn't bother me. And it doesn't make me unpatriotic if they do so. They have the right to do whatever the hell they want. Just like I'm sure when the Canadian team is going to play against Finland in the opener, I'm sure the Americans are going to boo the hell out of the Canadian national anthem. So it goes both ways. So am I going to be outraged or in an uproar over it? Absolutely not. I'm not going to expend any energy when it comes to that. But you do know that that game, Finland and Sweden, is going to be big. Or excuse me, Finland and Canada is going to be big, and I'll explain in a moment. But to go back to Saturday night with the booing of the national anthem, and for all the hype heading into that game, 2 seconds in, you had your first fight. And you had Matthew Tkachuk involved, and you had the Tkachuk brothers involved. Brandon Hagel was the other combatant in the first fight there, Florida versus Tampa, if you want to look at it from that regard. So just 2 seconds in, the gloves dropped. Then a second later, you had Brady Tkachuk going at it as he was fighting Sam Bennett. And now you had both brothers literally 3 seconds into the game. And then just 5 seconds after that, or let me do my math correctly. Yes, 5 seconds after that, you had a scenario in front of the net where you had, I can't even pronounce his name correctly, Parayko from the Blues going at it, where you had your third fight there. And even though it was a scenario where, was it Bob Probert, Joe Kocur versus Dave Brown and Craig Berube, or was it a throwback to yesteryear where you had Edmonton, Calgary, or any of the other rivalries that you had, or even go back to the Philly-Montreal brawl of May 14th, 1987, where you had Dave Brown versus Chris Nyland, John Kordick versus Darryl Stanley, a million tough guys on the Flyers, a zillion tough guys on the Canadians on the ice prior to the game. Absolutely nothing of that ilk. And boy, do I wish that was the case. But of course, with that scenario up in Montreal where you had the 3 fights in a matter of 9 seconds, that was just eye candy to say the least. And on top of all that, were there any boos? Were there anything thrown on the ice? Was there a situation where the fans just turned their nose on that, where they couldn't stand the fighting? That was palpable. That building was so intense you could cut it with a butter knife. And you may have a scenario, and I'll get to in a second, where we could see a rematch come Thursday. But granted, at the game after that, it settled down with the USA team won 3-1. And we know that that rivalry goes back to 96, where you had the fights back then in the World Cup. Then, of course, 2010 with the Olympics there up in Vancouver, where Sidney Crosby got the overtime goal for the gold medal. And then, even though this is on a much lesser scale, but you had USA and Canada go at it again. And to me, that is what hockey's all about. It's about having that physicality. It's about having even that intimidation. It's not being able to back down. Forget about standing up for your country. I get it that this is what the Four Nations Face-Off is all about. But it's about taking space in your ice. It's about making sure that you're not going to get pushed over. And I get it that you're not going to have resident tough guys on these teams. These are all-star teams. So it's not as if you're going to see Ryan Reeves or a guy like that or someone on the U.S. side that's going to be 6'4", 230 that are going to throw their weight around. They're not going to get any ice time in these games. But you do have the Kachuk brothers who do throw once in a while. And obviously Sam Bennett, he's not a guy that I'm going to look at as a tough guy. Brandon Hagel, the first fight, that was actually a pretty decent fight. I got to give it up. But again, you got to take what's out there. And yes, it would be much better if you had heavyweight bouts where you're going to really roll up your sleeves and say, oh my God, how's this going to shake down? Those players and those bouts are a thing of the past, unfortunately, because you're not going to see Matthew Olivier and guys like that be a part of this Four Nations face-off. But you got to love what you see. And now the game today, which is imperative, because if Finland does beat Canada, Canada's out for the final. So if you're rooting for whomever, but if you're rooting for more fisticuffs like I am, you got to root for Canada to win this game this afternoon. And I'm sure by the time you listen to it, the game's going to be long gone. I get it, understood, etc. But the final, which is going to be Thursday, before the season resumes on Saturday, we need to have Canada get that game because U.S. is automatically in with their 2 wins already so far in this Four Nations face-off. And I will say this, if you do have a rematch between the two, I don't expect fireworks right out of the gate. Maybe there'll be some pushing, shoving. Maybe they'll be chippy. I don't expect to have the 3 fights in 9 seconds like you saw there the other night. Who knows? Maybe you will have a fight off the face-off because now it's the Canadians coming into U.S. soil, and I'm sure the American faithful who are in the crowd, they're going to boo the hell out of the Canadian national anthem. So who knows? That's going to stir up the Canadians. Who knows what the starting lineup is going to be? If it's going to be a carbon copy of what we saw Saturday night. If that's the case, who knows? Maybe you'll have fisticuffs right out the gate. But what I'd be curious to see that, let's say we may get 1 fight in the first couple of minutes. All right, fine. But what if this turns out to be a blowout? What if it's 5-2 in the third period? What if it's a scenario where you get an empty netter at 5-2 and now it's 6-2 and now all hell breaks loose? I can see that happening. Now, I don't know if there's going to be suspensions because this is not a situation where it's an NHL game. This is an all-star scenario, and I don't think Gary Bettman and company, it's not as if they've said anything as far as the players trying to temper their emotions on the ice. Now, if Canada wins, who knows if there's going to be a memo sent out, which if you're Gary Bettman, don't send anything out. Let the players police themselves. Don't ruin the game by all of a sudden thinking that, oh, well, I don't want it to be a situation where the fights and maybe scrums and the fisticuffs are going to overtake the beautiful game that hockey is. No, because that's been a part of hockey since the beginning of time. So if that means there's going to be rematches, or if that means there's going to be other fights, or if that means that you're going to have an all-out brawl on the ice between the players and even goaltenders for that matter, then let it be. Don't ruin it, Gary Bettman. If anything, this brings even more added measure and even brings even more eyeballs to the sets because based on what I read, that there were over 5 million people that watched that game. So could you imagine if you're going to have a rematch there Thursday night, which will be on ABC, ESPN, and won't be on TNT, which I believe the game was on Saturday night, you may have, who knows, 6, 7, 8 million people watching. So please, Gary Bettman, memo to you. If it is another USA-Canada match, especially for the Four Nations face-off, whatever the gold or whatever bragging rights they're going to have, don't interfere. Stay away. Don't include the Canada team or the US team in any type of newsletter and any type of Western Union or message, memo, etc. Let the players police themselves because you'll have a better game overall than if you have to police them, and then you're not going to have any physicality. It's just going to be Disney on ice, and that is it. And to me, I want to see some revenge. I want to see some blood. I want to see some physicality because that's what hockey's been built on. And unfortunately, it's been pulled away from fans like us over the years. And I get it. Just like all the other sports, whether it's NFL, baseball, NBA, how they have to change the game with analytics and player safety and things of that nature. But you're taking away the deep-rooted integrity, intimidation factor of this game, and it will certainly be heightened if that's the case come Thursday if those two teams go at it. So we'll see what's going to happen at that time. But besides that with the hockey, there isn't anything else I could add to that. I am looking forward to a USA-Canada final. Let's hope we get that. And as far as a first half recap of the sport overall, the NHL, we've seen what the Capitals have done, and to me, they've been the biggest surprise. I know Winnipeg has played well, and it's interesting because Winnipeg started their season with an 8-game winning streak, and they led themselves into this break with an 8-game winning streak. So right now, they're 1 point ahead of the Capitals overall for the President's Trophy, and I'm sure that's something that they don't want to even talk about, but Winnipeg is in front, but the Capitals, and especially with what Alex Ovechkin has done, 5 weeks off with that broken leg, and he hasn't missed a beat. As we all know, him going for the pursuit of Wayne Gretzky's all-time goal-scoring record. So that's something that, of course, is on my radar. Is it on everybody else's radar? I don't think so. I'm sure the hockey media, yes, but the sports media, not so much. But that's why you come to me, people, when it comes to talking about all sports. Not just the NFL, not just what's hot, not what's happening. I talk about what's happening across the board. So keep that in mind. But the Capitals have been the biggest surprise, I think, in the sport, considering nobody expected them to be where they're at this point. And I understand we can look at Ottawa and Detroit playing pretty well as far as them trying to get themselves in the wild card mix. So give it up for them. Other than that, I know the Blue Jackets have played pretty well. They're at the bottom, but they're hovering right out on the fringe of the Eastern Conference playoff mix. But considering with the tragedy that struck there last summer, I should say, just that terrible story, as we know, with the Boudreaux brothers. So the Blue Jackets have certainly played well above their heads, although they've come into the break on a 4-game losing streak. So let's see if they can pick up the pieces and play a lot better as the season will resume there on Saturday. And then you had Colorado, who a lot of people thought that they could be a team to be reckoned with, and they've been floundering. I know they've had injuries and things of that nature. Utah trying to hang in there as well, although they have 57 points and certainly far back. I mean, not too far back in the playoff picture. They are certainly within a couple of arms length, but the new team in Utah trying to see if they can hang around to maybe make a surprise run there at a playoff spot. But we know Edmonton has played well, and they're in a neck-and-neck battle with Vegas out west in the Pacific, followed by the Kings, Vancouver, who had a big-time regular season last year and certainly have not played anything close to what they've done last year, although they've come into the break on a bit of a winning streak. But the NHL, to me, it's been the Capitals, it's been Alexander Ovechkin, a little bit of Ottawa and Detroit, especially more so Detroit. You wanted an original 6 team there. The Panthers have played well. I got to give them their due, considering they're the defending Cup champs. And then you have Winnipeg, Colorado, a little bit. We could talk about a disappointment. We could talk about them as being a disappointing team. Rangers, how could I miss them as far as a team that's a disappointment? I picked them to go to a Cup final. I picked them to have a big-time year. And this is coming off the heels of a President's Trophy last year. And who knows what deals are going to be made between now. I believe the trade deadline is March 6th. So we'll keep that in mind. I'm sure the Rangers are going to be wheeling and dealing, and they've been doing a lot of that here in the early part of their year. Re-signing Shesterkin, the goaltender, to a long-term deal. They traded away Jacob Trouba. They traded away Capo Caco. So who knows what's left for a Ranger team that's looking to try to get themselves back to a Cup final, as they have fallen short here over the last couple of years. And other disappointments, the Predators have been a big-time disappointment, as I'll talk about them in a minute, especially with my over-under win totals. They bring in Jonathan Marchessault as well as Steven Stamkos, and they have just been putrid there in Nashville. So I could talk about them being a disappointment, but that is pretty much your NHL in a nutshell when we talk about teams that have played well above what we thought. Washington, Detroit, not so much Winnipeg. They had a big-time year last year and obviously had a terrible first round as they were outed, especially Connor Hellebuck, who had a terrible series. I believe it was against Colorado. But with the NHL, you know I'm going to be on top of it. And we'll see what's going to happen here with this face-off over the next couple of nights. As far as my over and the win totals, not looking good in the NHL. In fact, I could be 0-6. That's how bad it is. Boston 99.5, Nashville 99.5, and the Rangers at 100.5. Now, I don't expect anything out of Nashville. You can forget about that. But can the Bruins and Rangers put on a big-time streak to get themselves over 100 points? Because that's what I'm going to need for them to do. Rangers, I need 101 in order for me to get wins there. I will get a win with Pittsburgh, and I think with the Blackhawks. Right now, Pittsburgh currently has 55 points. Their over-under win total is 90.5. The Blackhawks, 73.5. They're currently at 41, so I think I'm safe there. And then I have Calgary, 81.5, and they're currently at 60. So Calgary could be a stretch that could be an under. As far as my overs, I think I may go 0-3 there, unless, like I mentioned, those two teams have big-time runs. But right now I'm looking at 2-4, maybe 3-3, depending on if Calgary falters down the stretch. But other than that, it is looking pretty bleak there with my over-under point totals there in the National Hockey League. And other than that, there really isn't anything else to discuss when it comes to the NHL. I'll go through a second half recap, similar to the NBA, as I mentioned earlier, when we get to Thursday's podcast, so you definitely want to stay tuned for that. Now, let me get into the batter's box. Major League Baseball, as spring training is in full bloom. Pitchers, catchers, position players have reported, and there's already chatter and injury situations to discuss when it comes to Yankee camp. And it seems like they always go through injuries when it comes to the early part of spring, into spring training, and to the start of the year. And right now we're looking at Giancarlo Stanton as a guy that has elbow inflammation on both elbows, needs rest, no surgery that had been needed throughout the offseason. And right now looks like he may not even start opening day as the designated hitter there when the Yankees open up their season at home against the Brewers. So let's see what's going to happen with Stanton now that he's going into his, not his penultimate. He still has this year, next year, and 2027, the final 3 years of his contract. So Yankee fans are still going to have to deal with this. And when he's healthy, and he's streaky as we know, but he's a dangerous offensive player. But if he's going to have elbow issues, which may affect his swing, who knows what's going to happen. There's going to be a lot of shots of cortisone, I would think, throughout the course of the year. And, of course, a ton of rest. So we'll see what's going to happen with Stanton. Trent Grisham, the fourth outfielder, he looks like he has a hamstring issue where it's going to be manageable, and you would think that he's going to come up with the team there come at the end of March. But then you have Marcus Stroman. There's your chatter where he's a starter, and even though with a deep rotation of Garrett Cole, Max Fried, you also have Carlos Rodon, Luis Hill, who is your defending AL Rookie of the Year, and Clark Schmidt. There's your five-man rotation, but Marcus Stroman says he's a starter. He does not have bullpen on the brain. He is not looking to come out as a relief pitcher, so unless they're going to go with a six-man rotation, right now it looks like he's going to be the odd man out, unless he overtakes Clark Schmidt and maybe put him in the bullpen. We'll see. But Stroman, he is going to stand pat on him being a starter, but depends on how he performs here throughout spring. So that's a story that we're going to have to keep in mind. And who knows if he's going to be traded. I'm sure he's going to be dangled here throughout the course of the spring because I'm sure there's another team out there that could use a starting pitcher. So we'll see what's going to happen with Stroman here early on in camp, as well as the remainder from now until the end of March. Then you have Freddie Freeman, who, remember, had that bad ankle against the Mets in the National League Championship Series where he had to sit out a couple of games. And as we all know, he was a world beater in the World Series, winning the World Series MVP. Well, he needed ankle surgery and looks like he'll be ready for opening day. It was something that he was able to nurse through, and obviously with a lot of rest, but did get surgery. And he's going to probably get his 50 at-bats throughout the course of the spring. So just thought to bring him up as he had a very inspired locker room speech that I saw there in a video, where he said, all right, guys, last year was last year, but now this is where the journey begins. Yes, we could talk about all the accolades and everything that we did to finally get a full season under our belt, where they got their first full season championship since 1988. Of course, they did win the championship in 2020, but that was during the pandemic. But if you check on Twitter or social media, you'll see his speech, and it was certainly very inspiring on that front. And then you had Juan Soto, all smiles at spring, smacking the ball all over Clover Park there in Port St. Lucie, as, let's face it, he is going to be the savior of this ball club. I get it. Pete Alonso's back, and I know you already have Francisco Lindor in tow, as well as Mark Vientos, as well as Francisco Alvarez, a rotation that Kodai Senga right now is looking like he's lights out. But again, let's see him go through the rest of spring, hopefully healthy, ready to go as a number one starter. But all eyes and cameras were on Soto because of the contract that he signed, and with all of the expectations and all of the pressure that's going to be on his shoulders to produce big time for this Met offense for 2025 and beyond. So all is looking coconuts and palm trees down in the coast there, north of Palm Beach. But as we all know, we're going to have to wait and see how this is all going to play out in this long contract in an upcoming season where a lot is expected out of him and his Met team to get into the postseason and maybe back to an NLCS and beyond. So we'll certainly have to wait with that, as we're still more than 5 weeks away from the start of the baseball season in earnest, because I know you have the 2 games there. I believe it's in Japan or maybe even Korea with the Dodgers and Cubs. All right, now let me turn my attention for a couple other things before I bid adieu. One with tennis, and this revolves around the number 1 player as I break out the tennis racket. The number 1 men's player coming off of an Australian Open win, back-to-back wins for him, and one Jannik Sinner. And for Sinner, who had 2 failed drug tests last year for, I believe, a masseuse therapy where this steroid during, I guess, a couple of sessions where it was detected. Not only did he fail 1 test, he actually failed 2 tests. So that was hanging over his head, and the verdict has come down for a 3-month suspension for the number 1 player of the world, which means it starts now, where he's going to participate in the French Open come the latter part of May. How convenient, you must say? Yes, I can look at this and saying that maybe this is a slap on the wrist for Sinner, and I understand that this would be a big blow for tennis if, let's say, even if you said 6 months, because that means that he would not only not participate in the French Open, but he also wouldn't participate in Wimbledon. So you could argue maybe they should have given him a little bit more. Maybe he can't participate in the French Open, but then come back for Wimbledon. I thought that would have been at least one that you could say, all right, that was something that he's going to have to miss out on. Remember, Simona Halep had a situation, the recently retired Halep on the women's side, had a 9-month suspension where she had to sit out with a similar situation, taking a banned substance where it was going to be a 2-year ban, but it was in essence a 9-month suspension. Well, for Sinner, he's not going to miss out on any of the Grand Slam majors, and therefore, I'm sure he's going to keep himself in good shape between now and when he gets to Roland Garros. But from what the doping agency found, and what is it? Let me make sure I read this correctly. The World Anti-Doping Agency, the WADA, if you will, they came out and said during the summary of what happened there with Sinner, and let me see if I can pull up a quote here. It was a substance, right, during massage, banned anabolic steroid, which was accidentally contaminated. I mean, an accidentally contaminated. All right, 1 time I could get. Twice? But now, the WADA, based on Sinner, his explanation, I guess meeting the board and having to state his case, they actually accepted Sinner's explanation and felt as if it was a substance that was accidentally contaminated, so therefore they're going to take his word and only give him 3 months. Was there an investigation here? Did anybody go undercover to see whether or not only once but twice where he was caught with this substance? And listen, I get it, things happen, and maybe he was unaware, maybe the masseuse knew, and obviously Sinner didn't, but just going based on what Sinner said, it's almost as if, all right, Scout's honor, we're going to take him at his word. Now, I hope this doesn't look bad on them in the long run, because if Sinner does come down with another scenario similar to this, they're going to look terrible. Because, not that I'm a part of this doping agency or have any privy information as to how they're going to vet out this information as far as investigating this and go deep in the weeds. But how they look at it is that this performance-enhancing advantage that they had, it took place without his knowledge, and therefore, Sinner's word is gospel. Well, if that's the case, then Simona Halep shouldn't have gone through what she went through in a similar situation to what Sinner had just experienced. So, all right, I don't know if there's a little bit of a bias there, men's to women's. If that's the case, that's terrible. And I'm not saying that is the case, but not knowing the ins and outs, ups and downs, and just looking from afar, where Sinner, I think he should have gotten at least just the French. He should have sat out that tournament, give him that, at least let him feel that burn a little bit, even if he didn't know and was unbeknownst to him that there was a substance in that particular cream or medicine that was used throughout his therapy. But yeah, to me, that's a little bit lame sauce if you ask me. But all right, let's see if the situation doesn't arise sometime in the near future, because that's really going to look bad, not only just on Sinner, but also on the World Anti-Doping Agency. So we'll just keep that in the back of our mental Rolodexes for some time down the road. And then lastly, as I get into the car and put on the seatbelt, Daytona 500, and there really isn't much for me to unravel here, people, because William Byron, who won last year, and even though the start of the race had to be delayed due to inclement weather, but he is your now back-to-back two-time winner of the Daytona 500, even with the delayed start. Now, he had to avoid a crash there late, which helped out and certainly was able to get through the checkered flag unscathed. So for Byron to win back-to-back, first time that's happened since 2019-2020, I believe Denny Hamlin was the last guy to win back-to-back Daytona 500, so congratulations to Byron on that achievement. As, again, I'm not a big-time racing fan, as you know. I talked about that on Thursday's podcast. I didn't watch a lick of it. Yes, I did keep my fingers on the pulse to see what was going on and what was happening. And to me, because I didn't watch and because I didn't follow just what I read and a couple of highlights I watched, therefore, there is your big picture, which I know it's, people can say, come on, JAYREELZ, you got to do better than that. But I don't have a lot of investment in racing. What can I tell you? But it is a sports podcast, and I do have to state my case. There wasn't anything that was controversial or anything that happened in the latter part of the race. I mentioned Byron avoided that crash, which could have hurt his status of him getting to the checkered or to the finish line and past the checkered flag unblemished. But as it was, he did get to the end and did win back-to-back. So that's what you have there. And that's what you have at the podcast, people. Again, middle of February in the Sports Dead Zone. And that's what I got. Hopefully you were entertained and informed. And I thank you for stopping by, carving out precious time out of your day to listen to what it is I have to say about what goes on in the world of sports. If you haven't done so, subscribe, rate, review on all podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, the YouTube channel at JAYREELZ, which I post daily content. So you definitely want to keep in tune to that. Please subscribe there as well. And also on all my socials, if you want to hit me up with a question, comment, suggestion, you can do so at the following: Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JAYREELZ Podcast, Twitter, JAYREELZ1, just the number. The email address is the JAYREELZpodcast@gmail.com. Hit me up. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals, because whether you do or do not know, this is what I love to do, people. This is why I quit the workforce. I quit my corporate cushy job to do this full time. It's been well over a year. And pretty soon, I'm going to start earning a living on that. I know it's been treacherous. I know it's been tricky. I know a lot has been going on here, trying to get this on the tracks, trying to get this out there, and that's why I need your help, people. So please subscribe, all the good things that I mentioned on all the aforementioned social media accounts. Again, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JAYREELZ Podcast, the Twitter, etc. Just please go there. Please do that. Share it with your family, friends, foes, frenemies. And take screenshots, put it on these social media accounts, share it with me, I'll share it with everybody else, because I'm going nowhere as long as I'm alive and breathing. And with a big-time 7th anniversary podcast coming a week from this Saturday, you do not want to miss what's going on, as I'm going to have a big show planned, guests, a lot of things that's going to take place. So please, don't miss out. You've been warned, you've been told, and you've been apprised. Because as long as I'm sitting in front of this microphone and this camera, I will promise you, I'll deliver nothing but passion, fire, energy, fury with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JAYREELZ Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx, the South Beach, the South Central, the South Pacific, and all points beyond, peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JAYREELZ Podcast, on the flip, baby.